The views, thoughts, and opinions expressed during this or any broadcast belong solely to our guests or our hosts. These broadcasts do not represent or reflect the views of their employers, sponsors, or affiliated organizations.
Welcome to the Flipboard EDU podcast with your host, William Jeffrey, where we collaborate, communicate, and educate with the greatest educators in the world on Flipboard. Let's start the show.
Welcome back, Flipboard fam. This is your favorite coach, Coach Jeffrey. And we all know that the future of education has changed since COVID-19. But what that future looks like for students and teachers is as clear as mud sometimes. Educators know that at the core of that change is collaboration with peers and incorporating meaningful critical thinking exercises for students to learn from. That future also pushes for creativity to be inserted into teachers' lessons, requiring students to use that same creativity to show mastery of what they learned. All stakeholders need to be able to communicate effectively using 21st century tools like personalized audio and video. In this episode, we talk with David Preston, the author of The Academy of One, about open source learning and why education is more than books and tests. We also talked to David about why it's essential to teach students to use tools like the internet to collaborate and communicate effectively with their peers as classroom assignments. We also discussed training and professional development he offers to schools and teachers to incorporate the Academy of One into their curriculum. So like we always do about this time, let's collaborate, communicate, and educate with the best educators in the world right here on Flipboard EDU Podcast. Welcome back, Flipboard fam. This is your favorite coach, Coach Jeffrey, and I have an amazing guest here, Mr. David Preston. Welcome to the show.
Thank you, William. Appreciate being here.
Hey, Mr. Preston, tell everybody a little bit about yourself.
You used one of my favorite words in your introduction, and that's coach. Growing up in Los Angeles, my idol was Coach John Wooden, and he was one of my first mentors. I worked at his basketball camps when I was a kid, and one of the things the experience taught me was that there's a whole lot more to life than what we get in school. A lot of people don't know this about Coach, but he started off as an English teacher in Indiana and wrote his Pyramid of Success when he saw so many of his young people way back when, this is not a new thing, being motivated by things like grades and jobs and visions of their life that were externalities, money, fame, and really what he was seeing missing in education was a sense of intrinsic motivation. Now, I went on to UCLA where I got my bachelor's, master's degree, and doctorate. I'm a Bruin through and through, but I went off into the private sector. I knew all of this, but I went into a career in management consulting, and I taught at UCLA for 11 years. And I was helping a friend with a nonprofit organization, and we were talking to a principal at what was then the third or fourth largest high school in the country, 5,600 students on a multi-track year-round calendar. And the principal called me out. He said, "You academics, you're all alike. You write these research articles, you do these studies, but you don't know what happens on school campuses the days we don't give tours." And the more I thought about it, the more I couldn't argue the point. And he offered me a job teaching in the English department and kind of wanted to call my bluff about, all right, you want to see how this is. And I'm sitting there thinking, nope, I'm good. Why would I do that to myself? I was a career counselor's nightmare. But the more I thought about it, and the more you see every single year, now this is back in 2003, 2004. So I'm still operating in the aftermath of 9/11. I'm thinking about how all of the problems we seem to have are products of our thinking and our information, and we've only seen that magnify since then. And I really started to get taken with this idea. So I took a sabbatical from my practice, and I accepted the gig, and I taught in the high school English department. And man, what an education. Now, educators listening to your podcast, I'm sure, are not going to be surprised by what I say next. But when you do the heavy lifting as a teacher in the classroom day in and day out, you're the only one there at the scene of the crime. You're the only one who's got a handle on what actually happens when you're hit with all of these standardized curriculum, with all of these tests, with technology that no one takes time to prepare you for, no one trains you up on. And so coming in from the private sector, was a little bit different than coming straight out of a teaching credential program. And so I started breaking stuff, and I started trying to imagine how we could use the public internet to help students create value, to help students connect with people all over the world, essentially to do what everybody else in the culture was starting to do everywhere else but school. And I was all set to go back into the private sector when I met a young man. This was an environment that was tough. A 12-foot concertina wire, LAPD substation on campus, daycare for the students' children. Again, I say these things because educators are going to hear familiarity. But for people outside school, it's really important to remember this stuff was happening a long time before the pandemic, a long time before mass shootings. School was always a challenging place. And trying to replicate it online now for the sake of pandemic isn't going to fix anything. But to me, at that point, I was looking around thinking, how can I possibly make a difference? In walks this young man, and he's carrying a book, which was already unusual. The book, though, was The Art of Happiness by the Dalai Lama. And I'm just going, literally, where did you come from? And it turns out, this is where the story gets stranger than fiction. This young man forged his parents' names on the exchange papers and called them from the airport in Ulaanbaatar, Mongolia, to get on a plane to California to get his education. So in 18 months, he learns English, passes high school, and then invited me home for dinner. So I went to Mongolia, Western China, and Tibet with this young man and his family, and a lot of bells rang that I could not unring. I called my consultants when I got back and said, you know what, this is what I got to do. And I've ever since been in public high school classrooms, first in Los Angeles in the urban environment, and then on California's Central Coast at one of the oldest high schools in California.
My man, you said a mouthful. From John Wooden, working with the Hall of Fame, John Wooden, to going and working in the hood is where I love the hood. And then experiencing a whole new paradigm shift by going overseas to a place where you are definitely a minority and experiencing that. That's a lot to break down. And I definitely want to get into that. Most definitely. I want to start with, in your book, you wrote about, first of all, let's get the title of your book out.
Sure. The title is Academy of One, and it's about open source learning. And the reason I wrote it was because life is really all about experimenting with each other in our environment and getting to know ourselves in the process. And school makes it a whole lot more complicated than it needs to be. When you think about how young people learn math, for example, math is easy right up until the point that it stops being about arithmetic, where you can use manipulatives and experience things tactically and do it multisensorily. But when you get into algebra, now you're talking about abstract concepts. And that requires shared understandings of things that you've got to explain and sit with long enough until they sink in. Long story short, when you talk about learning, people get dizzy really quick. And when you talk about as Maslow's hierarchy of needs or any of the models with which educators are familiar, most everybody else just thinks, how hard could it possibly be? So every school has a teacher or a few quiet ones. They don't really go to meetings much, and if they don't say it, if they have a mouthful, but in their classrooms, it's just bananas. And unfortunately, the way that school organizations and communities tend to operate, those teachers are on the margins. In fact, a lot of them are insecure, looking over their shoulder, because if they get caught not doing that particular lesson from the textbook publisher on that particular day for the standardized test, not only are they not going to be appreciated, but they're going to have to defend themselves, and they might even get in trouble. And so what I realized was that I had to give what I do a name, and I had to make it so that we talked about coaching. I'm from LA, so my two greatest examples, like player, Magic Johnson. For me, the creator coming down the court was indefensible because nobody, including him, knew what he was going to do. Everybody remembers him for his playing career, but hardly anybody remembers him for his coaching career. You remember when that one season he took over at the beginning of the year and tried to coach the team?
Barely.
Well, good. I'm sure he's glad, because it was an embarrassment. He was horrible. And it wasn't because he didn't know the game. It was because he couldn't replicate what he did or make it accessible to his players. And it was totally frustrating to him and them. So at the level where I felt like people are excited about this, I watched my students, I watched their parents and their families, I watched our community. My sense was, I want to serve as many people as I possibly can. How do I do that? You check the boxes, you give a TED talk, but at some point you've got to codify this a little bit. And the best way I could think to discipline myself to go through that process was to listen to all of the friends who were nagging me to say, write the book. And to be honest, it was a reluctant thing for me, because I love to tell me, you're giving me 2 questions. I go a mile a minute and my students will say, yeah, that's what he does. But to sit down and write that all, that was the discipline to really make it so that other people could use it.
So looking at traditional schooling as far as tests, assignments, due dates, roles of desk, what do you believe that the future of education goes beyond that paradigm? Like, how do you think education is going to be in the future?
I think we have a lot of opportunities and resources that we're not using. You know, at UCLA, there's a wonderful quote above Royce Hall, that iconic twin tower building in the brick on every basketball game commercial. And it talks about using the tools of our age to their best advantage. And when I think about the internet and I think about the conversations that you see right now during the school campus closures, during the pandemic about online learning, we're not doing online learning. We're doing a very well-intentioned crisis intervention with a lot of people who don't know how the internet works. You know, for 50 years, we've had the internet. We don't have a national curriculum or even an awareness building campaign to figure out all the code behind what you and I are using right now. It's bad enough if you're driving in your car and it breaks down and you can't fix it. But if this breaks down, we're nowhere. So I think for starters, we need to build awareness about the tools we're using. And I think that access, high-speed access, needs to be reconsidered as a civic and a human, because if you're on board and you're getting the information, whether it's financial trading or research or access to scholarships or even just the people in your neighborhood, you're in. And if you're not getting those things, you're out. And we've known for a long time in this country, and I'm saying this as a white guy to a black guy, social networks and access to power and authority and resources are damn near everything. So I think for starters, school is going to look a whole lot more like we need to help young people and adults at this point understand the water in which we're swimming. That's number one. Number two, we don't need the testing and the publishers. We don't need it. You see, every student's got the whole world in their pocket. We can access any factoid with the click of a mouse, but we're missing out on how to think. We're missing out on how to connect with each other. We're missing out on things like empathy, critical thinking, and we see it all over the place. We see it in our elections. We see it in our social policies. And it's not good enough to stand in the street and be counted, although that's definitely a start. We have to think our way through these things so that we can exercise and pull those levers. And that, to me, is what education in this country, the way I grew up learning about public education, at least, if we invite more people to the table and make it a real public education, a lot of things become possible that right now just sound like pretty speeches.
I watched your TED Talk, and you were a pioneer basically doing some of the stuff that we were doing. I love to see educators who use the internet to make it a global classroom structure. But part of the issue is that teachers today say that using cell phones and using the internet is actually going backwards. It's actually going opposite of what you're talking about. How do you convince somebody like that there is a global classroom available to them and their students?
Yeah, that's a really good question, William, because I think just to be empathetic, I'm a pretty hard charger and I care a lot about the things I care about. But I also think that's true for everyone. And I want to be empathetic in my own practice. So when I hear that, and I'm just imagining, but what I imagine is that, first of all, people are hurting. They're dealing with so many different sources of stress and pressure and pain that it's difficult for them to imagine that now could possibly be a good time to sing Kumbaya or solve problems. That's absolutely the challenge, though, because this is the best time to do it. The pandemic, the social justice issues, even climate change, to use the metaphor, have heated things up to the point that an institution that has never really listened is almost pliable. We almost have a window where things are flexible because nobody thought the SAT would go away, but right now it did. So first, I want to just acknowledge that people who come to this profession need to be regarded as professional. And that means I can't reject that point of view that you just represented out of hand without asking some good questions. What is it about technology that takes people away in your mind? Because I'm guessing if I could at least invite a conversation, then we could get to a point where we could look through the long view of history and remember that the book was supposed to be luminous also. There have been lots of points where people have looked at the new tools and said, oh my gosh, there's no way if we can use a word processor and you don't have to be that conscious with your typewriter. And you and I remember, you get to the end of the page and blow it and that page over again. Well, there's discipline in that, young man. Now, at the same time, I also think it's super important not to get into a position bargain over this. I'm not saying technology is good. I'm saying technology is a tool. If you watch the TED Talk, you may remember I made a comment in there somewhere about a screwdriver. If Enzo Ferrari had fallen in love with the tool, we never would have gotten the car. And I could give a rat's. Am I allowed to say stuff on?
Man, you can curse. I can bleep it out. It's all good.
As a professional educator, I could not care less about the technology for the technology's sake. But when I think about what we need to build, we have the tools. And so since young people are growing up and spending hour after hour on everything from Snapchat to Fortnite to Instagram to Facebook, if we don't address how to be mindful, how to maintain your focus, how to program these tools and create routines around them so that you can use them and stop letting them use you, because that's the environment in which we live. Right now, every kid comes to school with a smartphone, and the teacher finds themselves, number one, blocking them off from what feels best for them to use in their lives, and number two, coming across as a barrier to everything that it holds. And it's a losing proposition. So I would rather find a way to answer those questions by asking more about, so where does that come from and how is that for you? Because we could definitely get into the game of canceling signals and stealing data. And I've had fun with that because kids don't know anything about security. I mess with them all the time. And they trip out when they go, oh my God, he looks old, but he knows a couple things. But that, as cute as it is, and sometimes as satisfying as it can be, it's also the cat and mouse game. And the bigger culture here is about school being students versus teacher. Now, if you just look at the numbers in the classroom, why would you play that game? An elementary school teacher has between 20 and 40. A high school teacher has between 150 and 200. When every single person in a corporate meeting knows that they're there because they have something to contribute. When I was consulting, if you get a bunch of people in the room and they're not talking, they're stealing from the company. We want those perspectives. I even want a good conflict, because if I can be hard on the ideas and soft on the people, we build the relationships and we forge thinking to the point now we've got something of quality. And for me, a big part of open source learning is building with each other. Why would I build an entire curriculum for a student I've never met? I don't know what they need. And to say that it's going to be the quadratic equation or the Hawley-Smoot tariff.
I'm just listening to you because that's deep. So who is in charge? If we really look at the state of the American educational system, and I'm going off my questions, and I'm sorry, but if we look at the state of the American educational system and we have people like you, there are more people like you who see that there's a better way. So why has it not been changed already?
When you look throughout history at the greatest educators that you can think of, who comes to mind?
Oh, I got one. It's my favorite educator. It's Jesus. He was my favorite.
Knew it. So let's start with that one. Now, hold Jesus as a bookmark, because I'm going to come right back around to him for the punchline.
Gotcha.
If you think about the greatest educators in history, who you got?
Socrates, Confucius.
Right?
Yeah.
Now, look at how different just those names are. And what they all have in common? Shitty career endings. Now, even if you go up to Jaime Escalante, Stand and Deliver, the man, look at what he did in East Los Angeles at Garfield High School with students who were not even expected. They were so successful on the AP exams that they earned themselves an investigation and they had to take the test twice and prove themselves all over. You look at people like, what's the gentleman's name? Dumbing Us Down. It'll come to me just in a second. But all of these educators who get to the end of their careers and are thanked for their trouble by being booted out because they don't fit. The question that you asked has more to do with the economic and political power structure of a community. When the Texas school board a few years back says that we're going to outlaw critical thinking, we got problems. And the way I look at it, this is not about Democrat and Republican. It's not about rich and poor. It's about the fact that we have an increasingly complex and uncertain future. And The Economist and all of these other publications years ago were saying that if your child is in the third grade now, they're going to be doing work that doesn't even exist yet. So what we really need to be focused on is how we understand ourselves, how we understand each other, and how we reason our way through things by asking questions. A few minutes ago, I heard you practicing Carl Rogers 101 and reflectively listening. Told me that you were actively considering what I was saying. Felt good. We don't learn these skills in school. We don't learn how to be mindful. We don't learn time allocation or workflow or how to have a good argument with somebody. And these are really important skills. So when you ask me about how is it that we have so many people that understand this and don't practice, I think we have a lot more than we think. The mob, the Sicilian mafia, the Cosa Nostra has this great concept of omerta, code of silence. I hear a lot more of those guys in the media talking about the bad things about their practice than I do teachers, except when their lives are threatened by having to go back to school during a pandemic and nobody's thought it through. That's a pretty extreme condition. And yet we've got so many other dumpster fires that people can't properly panic about that. But I think when we look at our children's future, there's no loss of learning this year. Every young person I know learned a lot since last February and March when campuses were closed. What they're learning, whether it's about the presidency, whether it's about race, whether it's about what's important to know, that's an open question. And every single time I have a new group of students and I ask them, what is it you're really interested in? I've never had a student who's at a loss for an answer. It takes them a while to think about it because they've never been asked and those muscles have atrophied because they've learned how to play the game of looking like a good student. But once they get the idea that it's really okay, then life gets really interesting in a hurry.
Yeah. And I am in administration, probably some of the bad guys in most people's eyes. One of the saddest things I think in my career is when I run across a student who's about to graduate and they don't know what they're going to do. And they don't even have a clue of even trying to find out. And it's like pulling teeth. It's like they owe you money or something, and it just clams up. And that's so sad that we have children who have played the game so much that they have just cocooned themselves into not knowing their own future. So I find that frustrating as an administrator, just sharing that.
Well, and I appreciate you as an administrator, because it's a difficult job and you have to go through a lot of acculturation into those roles to get those gigs. And by the time a lot of people do, they lost the initial something that drew them to the profession in the first place, because everybody's got to make their deals with the organization to execute at that level of hierarchy. And it's a hard thing to do. And a lot of administrators that we both met over the years, you tell me if you think I'm wrong about this, but I have a theory. They're like stars. So whatever light and heat they're giving off was generated a long time ago in a galaxy far away when they still believe. So the fact that you make space for these conversations, I'm grateful to you. We need people like you.
Yeah, I appreciate it, man. So where can teachers get training to incorporate these ideas into their curriculums?
I offer individual coaching. I offer group work at schools. I do talks for faculties and for organizations like associations and unions. People can find me on my website, davidpreston.net. They can also find me on Twitter @PrestonLearning. And, you know, what I heard you say about the young person who was on the edge of graduation and not knowing, I found myself thinking something I don't usually think. Usually I'd come back with something like, yeah, we're raising veal for the rodeo, because we say, sit in this box, think that way, bell rings. And by the way, anybody who thinks that the bell and Pavlov is psychological, just as a reminder for your audience, because I'm a teacher and I can't help myself, he was not a psychologist or a psychiatrist. It was not a mental or a cognitive function that led the dogs to salivate when the bell rang. He was a medical doctor. It was physiognomic, and it's a physical response. So we're not even reaching young people's minds with those kinds of practices. We're treating them like dogs. And I love dogs. But so when I hear a young person leave school like that, and there are a lot of reasons, whether it's authoritarian, whether it's racial or ethnic or cultures. Most of my students come from Mexico or Central America, where looking an authority figure in the eye and speaking directly is considered disrespectful. And we don't really understand those kinds of dynamics because there are no trainings for that. I was lucky in the sense that I grew up in Los Angeles and I learned from all sorts of different people with all sorts of different backgrounds. My friends and my neighbors and the people who kicked my butt in the beginning were my teachers. But it is a disconnect because on the one hand, I wouldn't take advice from my 18-year-old self. So not knowing the whole plan when you're that old, okay, there's some beauty in that actually, because as we get more information, Americans change careers something like 6 or 7 times. But at the same time, it's cruel and unusual to say, sit still, keep your eyes on your own paper, don't speak, don't even go to the bathroom unless you raised your hand and gone through all that sarcastic back and forth. I don't hear anybody talking about what they miss about campus when it comes to bathroom passes. But then when you go into the working world, it's why can't you communicate more effectively? Why can't you be a better team player or solve problems or see opportunities? And when you ask me the question about what I see from school, I think it's all about need. We need to address the need. And the need isn't to push people through a factory model just towards the university requirements or the graduation credits. We have to be more mindful about that because what we're creating is a society that isn't thoughtful. And when you look at documentaries like The Social Dilemma, or when you see what happened recently at the Capitol, or when you see what happened with George Floyd, this is literally thoughtless. And I think we're at a point where for a long time, it was good enough to say, now, William, I know that Mrs. Jones isn't, but we all had to go through that and learn different personalities. And besides, when you graduate, you'll have it just as good as your parents, if not better. Just go through it and get your diploma. Well, that social contract is broken. It's not ethical or moral to say to a young person, just suffer because I had to do it too, because now nobody knows what's next. And colleges and universities are looking at the profit margins instead of what they're getting out of high school. So I really think that we've talked a little bit more about the perils than the opportunity. If we can connect people with themselves again, instead of playing a role. You know, Eddie Murphy had this great line about first dates. He said, you've never been on a first date. You sent your representative. And when people show up in school, it's a vulnerable place. It's a dangerous place, not just in terms of violence or bullying or mental abuse, but in terms of being who we are and having our integrity, connecting our thoughts and our words and our actions. So opening the source and reconnecting people with that passionate curiosity that anyone who's been around a 5-year-old is just off the charts. That's step one. Step two is integrating these different topics. We have a lot of really wonderful resources in school. I'm not down on school. Work with them. But the only place where you take life apart subject by subject is on campus. Everywhere else, it all fits together. You've got architects solving cancer problems because they understand design and structure. So having an interdisciplinary experience, and that opens the source. And then using the internet, not only to help us with the internet drives our economy and our democracy and our lifestyle, but using that as a way to connect with people all over the world based on interest for support and critique. That's how we create value. That's how we create a sense of trust and interdependence. People always used to worry, even back when I gave that talk, you let students on the internet, that's terrible. They're going to embarrass you. And besides, there's like porn and gambling online. I've had thousands of students go through this. I've advised campuses where there's thousands of more, and the next student who does the wrong thing online is going to be the first.
Excellent, man. I know exactly what you're talking about because I used to do the same thing, and it's a mind shift in order to get educators on board with the way education is going. It's not even where it is now. Where we're at now, education is past that. And in order for us to be a viable nation and have sovereignty as we have experienced it, which is a good thing for us all, the sovereignty of America, in order for us to continue that, we need to reshape how we educate our students. I want to thank you for coming on the show, my brother. That was an excellent. Where can we find you?
On Twitter, I'm at Preston, Preston, learning. And my website is davidpreston.net. And for you and anyone, you've got my email, and I'd be happy to reach out to anybody. If you contact me through that website, by the way, there's a contact form, and that actually dumps into my email. And I do reply to everybody because right now it's just too important not to. I really appreciate you helping to spread the word.
Hey, man, I thank you for working with me, man. This is the snowpocalypse right now. It hasn't been 13 degrees in Texas in about 70 years. Everything is just a little different here. I was hoping that we was going to make it because a lot of my coworkers are out of power right now. So I'm glad that I could talk to you, man.
Stay safe and stay warm. I appreciate you, and I appreciate the work that you do. Anytime you want to do part two, you let me know.
Hey, man, I got you because we definitely got to dig into the John Wooden story. As a matter of fact, I'm going to invite you right now to come back. We're doing a March Madness segment where we're talking about basketball tenets, the framework of basketball in education. I want to invite you back on for our March show, if that's okay.
I love it.
Good. I'll send you some dates. Hey, man, thank you again for coming on.
All right.
All right. Take it easy. It's time for Flip Tips. Today's Flip Tip is brought to us by Janet Spire. So today's lesson is how to share your Flipboard magazine on social media. Number 1, open Flipboard and navigate to the magazine of your choice. Select the 3 dots on the top right side of the magazine. Select Share the Magazine from the top and drag the navigation down. Click on your magazine to select Share. Scroll past the social media icons. Select one to share for your magazine. Type your post information and then select Tweet to share it. Check your magazine post on Twitter or Facebook. Congratulations, you shared your first Flipboard magazine. Flipboard fam, thanks for sticking with me on this episode. I want to thank David Preston for taking the time to talk with us about his book, The Academy of One. David is an educational consultant, and you can find him on social media if you're looking for a presenter or a professional development opportunity. You can read more about this episode and other educators on our educators blog on flipboard.com. I want to give a huge shout out to Aileen Laylor and Crystal Vanderboom for the editorials on the Flip EDU Educators blog. Remember to subscribe to our Flipboard EDU magazine, which is also found on flipboard.com. Also, a special shout out to my colleagues and our students who lived through Snowvic 2021. Many of us went without power and water for a week. That's a slight glimpse of what our students experience on a daily basis. I hope we all can change from this experience for the better. Please subscribe and share our podcast with an educator or colleague. Our podcast is available globally and everywhere you listen to podcasts. So until next time, family, stay warm.